Hi everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the sensitive nature of the topics we'll be discussing. Today we'll be exploring subjects related to cremation, embalming, and suicide. We understand that these topics can be difficult for some listeners, and we want to assure you that we approach these discussions with care, respect, and a commitment to providing accurate and helpful information.
Here we go.
Do it.
Okay, cool.
Here we go.
Welcome to the first podcast of Coffin Talkin'. I'm your host, Holly. I'm here with my dad, Frank. And Frank has a very unique set of skills that we'll hear about a bit later that make him a very interesting man to talk to. So we thought, why not record it? This podcast covers everything strange and weird, funny, and unexplainable, and ultimately all things death from a mortician himself. So let's jump in. Dad, Frank, if you could explain just your career, how you got where you're at, that'd be great.
Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, my name is Frank. I have been in the industry since 1985. I work specifically, I was actually one of the youngest funeral directors in the nation at the time when I became a funeral director. The most important thing for me I've worked in California, Utah, and Arizona, and have been licensed in each state. And over the course of the years, I've been able to experience, log, record different experiences that I personally have been a part to. And something that would be interesting for a lot of people is just basically seeing what a funeral director or a mortician would see behind the scenes. And after speaking with families and their loved ones after they've experienced a death, and then the course of action that can occur prior to the burial, the cremation, or whatever form of disposition they are actually looking to have for their loved one. So in the course of the has it been 40 years, roughly? 40 years, roughly, that I've been in the industry, I hope that you'll understand a little bit better the importance of the mortician, what they can do to actually help you. And I think at this point, I'll define, if possible, just so you understand what an undertaker is. That's the name that was given to an individual that was helping. In the olden times, the title was undertaker. And that specifically meant that someone outside the family would come to them and say, let me help you undertake the items that you're actually going to be experiencing. And so with that in mind, the name has evolved over time, allowing it to go from undertaker, digger, mortician. But it has evolved, but it did essentially start as an undertaker. So essentially someone that would help someone in need once a death has occurred, to allow them the opportunity to celebrate the life of their loved one in the manner in which they choose.
Yeah, that's great. I always kind of, I don't be offended, but
Okay.
I feel like undertaker is usually kind of a negative connotation or kind of like a weird connotation, but it's cool that it originally was started to, I'm going to help you undertake this because this is a huge change in your life and obviously in that individual's life.
Witnessing that same theme and wording, we always like to back it up with, hey, we'll be the last to let you down. So
Perfect.
Okay.
We're going to be transparent here.
Okay.
We will be the last to let you down.
There you go.
That's great. So specifically in Arizona, you've been more on the cremation side, and then now you're focusing more on the funeral service side, right?
That's correct. So
okay, good. I'd be embarrassed if I got that wrong.
So I've worked in both areas. We owned our own crematory for about 11 years. And so a lot of experiences there. But before the crematory side, we did work in a number of different funeral homes in Arizona. So I probably worked in 4 or 5 different funeral homes, the crematory, and now the one that we presently are operating.
Okay, cool. So what brought you, if you worked in the funeral service industry, what specifically made you shift to buying your own crematory and then just focusing on cremation for a number of years, a decade?
Okay, thanks. So bouncing back and forth with regards to funeral and cremation, I could see the writing on the wall years ago. Could see the writing on the wall that the majority of final disposition of a loved one would probably be cremation, only because of cost and people in their green sense of, I guess, diligence, if they want to call it that. I think it's false allegiance. But they want to be green, and so they just think
Right.
they'll go ahead and cremate, and then that saves space. And
Somehow that's better.
Yeah, cemeteries spaces are saved, and not enough people are no longer being buried. So it's one of those options that people have, and I can see that because of cost. If you were burying someone, you'd be looking at $7,000 to $8,000, maybe $7,000 to $10,000. This was in '87, or cremate for less than $1,000. So a lot of people would bounce to that figure.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, a lot of people would like to go to cremation just for the simple reason of the economic side.
Right.
So I got into it when my father passed away when I was 9, and his death, I guess, left an impression on me that I still reflect upon a lot. And so whenever I think of him and what took place at his funeral, then I have always wondered, well, where are my allegiances at? What is it that I want to be doing now, and where should I be ending up? So essentially, through that course of action, that's essentially where I got to where I am today.
Okay. Was there anything specific? I realize you were very young when your dad died, but was there anything specific of like, well, I remember the funeral director, I remember the funeral was conducted in this way, that maybe you wanted to change an aspect of that? Or is it more of, this was a really good experience for our family, so I'd like to give that opportunity to other people?
So mine was a little bit different. For the longest time, I wanted to be a forensic pathologist. And so I always was intrigued by death. Not only the death, but the manner of death, how people pass away, what would cause them to get into the circumstance that would cause their death. Those are the things that would be most interesting to me. So at my father's viewing, I remembered tons of people. He was a government official in the state of Utah. And so there were lots of people there. And I just remembered, kind of as a young man, kind of creeping up and looking over the edge of the casket and then seeing my father's mouth open just a little bit. And there was that little shiny thing in his mouth. I was thinking to myself, what is that?
What is Dad eating?
I want some, Dad. And so also the eye was just a little bit of a jar, but I couldn't see the iris of his eye. And so I thought that was interesting. And so as the funeral progressed, I remembered sitting there with my brother and thinking to myself, and even talking with him, do we even know Dad? Because of all the stories that were being told about this man that was my father. But I was now hearing the perspective of other individuals that worked with him, and saw him in a workplace environment, not a home-based environment.
Yeah, much different.
Yeah, and so as I was starting to listen to what he was doing and what people remembered of him, I just thought, this is very therapeutic, not only for those that might be listening, but also for family members that don't maybe know their family member as well as they would like to. Getting a different perspective is always good. And so anyway, when the time came, after the services and stuff, I said, I wonder what was going on in the back rooms of a mortuary, and what was actually transpiring, what brought my dad from the point of his passing away at a hospital operating table to the viewing, what exactly transpired, what was happening. So I think it was that thought that pushed me into the funeral side, besides other, and we can get into that later, but other different circumstances that would have pushed me in that direction as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point to make too, because a lot of people, you don't think about that. You don't think about the behind the scenes until you have someone close to you pass away, and you're going, who's taking them?
Yep.
What's happening to their body up until the time that they died to now.
Yeah. Are they taking care of them?
Are they taking care of them? Yeah.
Are they being gentle? Are they treating him like I would treat my dad? Like
exactly.
I would treat my dad if he was to come into me and into my facility at the time, would I be treating him like recognizing him as the father of someone else?
Right.
And with the dignity and respect that was afforded him, or it should be
Yeah.
afforded him.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's heavily influenced how you treat the individuals that come into your care.
Yeah.
It's just, this is someone's loved one. Someone is grieving this person.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I've always thought that it's always interesting to me how we live in a disposable society. And so we tend to think sometimes that, well, mom's passed away, dad's passed away, so let's just go ahead and do the fastest manner of disposition as possible.
Yeah. But circling back, let's talk about a bit more about the cremation process, because this is something, when I married Caden, my husband, I came to find out that not everyone knows the cremation process from start to finish. And, I think it's something that's very interesting and very intriguing, and it's kind of scary because no one knows really the whole process of what goes on. So if you could just explain to us what that process entails, start to finish, that'd be great.
Sure. I hope that through this podcast, some of the taboos will be lowered. Some of the taboos will be broken.
What certain taboos?
Well, for instance, the secrecy that goes on in a mortuary itself. No one knows what goes on in the embalming process, as a general rule. No one knows what happens to a loved one once they pass away at a hospital, how they get from the hospital to either the mortuary or the crematory.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to be kind of closed,
tight-lipped
about everything that's being done. And I've always been willing to be as transparent as possible so that people understand exactly. And besides, this helps them understand exactly what they're paying for.
Yeah,
the more they understand, then the more they see value in it.
Right. It's an expensive industry. And when you do just look at cost alone, I mean, you're not going to buy anything without knowing what you're buying.
That's exactly right. No,
how should this be any different? Right.
Yeah. Who would? So anyway, you asked about the cremation process. So let's just start from, let's say, for instance, we're going to call him Paul. Paul gets killed. And so he goes to one of two places. He either dies in the hospital or he dies at scene where the accident occurred. So if he dies in the hospital, then of course the family can contact the mortuary directly and have a mortuary member come over to the hospital and bring him into their care so that the arrangements can go ahead and be made for him to be cremated or buried, whichever one. We're talking about cremation. So we're just going to say Paul's going to be cremated. That's one option. The second option is if he dies on scene, then the medical examiner becomes involved. The medical examiner then has the obligation through taxpayer funding to discover the cause of death from Paul. What caused his death? And you say, oh, it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, he died in an auto accident. So so he was impaled. So, but they want to see if he was on something. They want to see if he was on drugs. And if he wasn't on drugs, they want to know if the person that hit him was on drugs. So, and it's all based in insurance. Insurance is the main driver of the cause of death, because if you have an insurance policy and a person dies under circumstances that are questionable, those insurance policies sometimes will pay full amount, partial amount, or no amount, depending upon the cause of death. And so that's what the medical examiner is there to do, to help the insurance companies decipher the cause of death and mode of death. So let's follow Paul still. He died in a hospital. The family has decided on which mortuary they're going to call. So they call the mortuary. The mortuary then dispatches someone to go to the hospital and bring Paul into their care. Paul is brought to the mortuary and then placed under refrigeration. Now, the refrigeration should be and will probably be kept between 35 and 40 degrees, and that's where it should be. Some funeral homes will keep it at 32, right at freezing. I think that's a little extreme. Only if you have to embalm later. You have to let the individual thaw. The individual is placed in refrigeration. There's a series of amount of paperwork that needs to be done before cremation can be done, and it's approved by the medical examiner for here in Arizona for the cremation to occur. And that's only because they want to make sure that the cause of death listed by the doctor is a valid cause of death. So they go ahead and read through that cause of death, and once that death has been determined a good, a quote unquote cause of death,
Right.
then
Valid.
Valid, okay. Valid
know.
cause of death, then they go ahead and will go ahead and allow us to go forward with the cremation. So the individual, for the dignity of Paul, would be placed into an outer burial container. In this case, a cardboard casket, most likely. Families can choose whatever they want. People can be cremated in caskets, and they can be cremated in mainly wood caskets or a pressed wood or fiberboard casket. The ones that are most economical, that most people will provide, are cardboard caskets. Okay, so most of the times when people have passed away, wherever they're being retrieved by the mortuary, it's usually done in a van. Very seldom a hearse is used. The hearse is only used in specific arenas where a casket is used. So the hearse is specifically designed to carry a casket. Any other transport of a deceased human being will be done by a van. And it's usually a cargo van, could be a caravan, could be a town and country. There's so many different vans out there that are long enough to carry a gurney. And that's what you're looking for. You just want the back side of a van to be large enough to be able to carry a gurney. And but most transportation takes place within a van. So they will be placed in a cardboard casket, then transported to a crematory. Some places have crematories on site.
Mm-hmm.
Most don't. The crematory, when I say crematory, you think of what, Holly? What do you think of a crematory?
I think of the big building where the fire department was called out to multiple times.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, that's neither here nor there, but whatever. Okay.
No, usually, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a viewing room if a family wants to see the cremation actually happen.
Yep.
And then you have the retorts, the furnaces, for lack of a better term.
Right. So the retorts, you mentioned retort, and that's not a legal term. It's what they are called. That's what an individual is placed into to be cremated in, and that's called a retort. We had 4 at the time, and Holly made mention to fire departments because sometimes crematories
became good friends with them.
That's right, and also with air quality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So air quality is not.
So all those Greenpeace people, think again.
Think again. But yeah, we became good friends with the fire department, and they would always call before they were dispatched to our facility saying, "Frankie, okay? Is the fire outside the chambers? Nope, we're good. It's all controlled." So they would usually dispatch or dispose of it and just write it off saying it was fine. Now, sometimes if I got into a problem, I would call them directly. And I would just say, "Hey, look, I need you to come down here now. I've got a situation that I just need your help to control." And I'll just share one fast experience. We had, so that men cremate slower than women. And women, I don't know why it is, but once the cremation process starts, their body fat will release much quicker than a man's. And so
interesting.
You can get, then the floors of the retorts are valleyed like this,
right?
Just a little bit, and that's supposed to hold enough of the body fluids or fat to allow it to burn off, to allow it to burn off before it gets to a dangerous situation. But if you have an individual female that is 400 pounds, maybe 500 pounds, sometimes that valley doesn't hold the fluid long enough for it to catch fire, so it will spill, and it begins to seep out of the machine. And so once that seeps out of the machine, fire surely can and probably will follow right behind it. So it becomes a very scary thing for a cremationist or cremation operator to see and witness body fluids or body fat in this instance start to make its way across the floor of your building,
because you're seeing essentially gasoline being poured on your floor.
That's exactly right. And it's very hot. It's very hot. I have second and degree burns on my legs from trying to stop a hot body fat or fluids. I hate to be so crass,
right?
Trying to stop it, in certain areas, and so all you have is a flat mouth shovel, and you're just scooping it together, hoping to get some kitty litter on it in time to stop it. But every once in a while, it doesn't always work. So that being said, Paul is then transported back to Paul. He's now transported to the crematory in this cardboard box or cardboard container. And the box is then placed inside the retort. The chambers are then warmed up to at least 800 degrees before the cremation begins. And that's when the flames are actually enabled to start the cremation process. So
so it starts at 800. How quickly or what temperature does it build to?
So it depends on the size of the individual. Here in America right now, the average weight of an individual is increasing. So I would say that your average male is about 260 pounds, and your average female is right around 140. So 150. And so by the time they pass away, that's the amount that you're looking at. Now, as a cremationist, you look at the individual, you weigh everybody, and we could cremate about 2 pounds a minute. So if I weighed 300 pounds, then it would take me an hour or 150 minutes, roughly. So you're looking at 2 hours and 30 minutes for the cremation of that individual. So you can set your day depending upon how many
you've got in the freezer.
Yep, and how much weight you're going to try and cremate that day. And you always want to start with your heaviest weights in the morning when the machines are cold, because that gives them enough time to absorb the heat. And then your lighter ones, 60, 80, 150, 180 pounds.
They go much faster.
Yeah, and plus they don't smoke. They won't smoke as well.
Right. So the heavier individuals is who's going to smoke.
That's right.
Because that fat pools.
Correct. And
so it's just burning the fat.
It's okay. I won't liken it to a breakfast food that everyone seems to be enthralled in
bacon.
Yes. Some bacon. You know how that bacon grease will start to bubble and spit, and that's exactly what happens with the human body. So anyway, so once the cremation is done, all you're really looking at is skeletal remains. Now, during the cremation process, the cremator will rotate that individual a couple of times so that he makes sure all the tissue is burned off. Very seldom will someone leave someone on the floor of the chamber and not move it at all. They're always being moved around. Plus, it's faster, more efficient if you move individuals around. But once the cremation process is over, and just going back to your temperature thing, Holly, it's that you can start at 800. That's what EPA says you should have your machines warmed up to before you start a cremation. And then it can go as high as 2200 degrees. You don't want to ever get it that high, because then you're creating thermal damage to your machine. But the average temperature time is between 16 and 1850, 1600 and 1850 degrees.
Right. And it fluctuates.
It does fluctuate. It will throughout the process. It will fluctuate up and down depending upon how heavy the individual is. So, and then once the cremation is completed, you do have about a half hour to 45-minute cool down time before you can actually get in there and pull the bone. And that's essentially what you're getting when ash. People say, "Oh, it's the ash, it's everything," and no, it's all the tissue and stuff burns off.
Sorry,
yeah, and so all you're getting is bone that's back. So the ash is bone. So just be aware of that and kind of dispel that myth.
Right.
It means there is no tissue. It's all bone.
And that's just so you scrape it out, basically, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
Once everything's burned away, and then you have them in metal containers. Right.
There's metal brooms or brushes that are used to pull cremated remains from the back of the chamber to the forward. And that's either a drop bucket in the back or a drop bucket in the front.
Okay.
And so it's a cooling tray. And so the cooling trays carry all the bone, and then they're set out and they'll cool. And so once they cool, then you can go ahead and place them in a processing unit, which is a huge blender.
Bone blender?
Yeah, it's a bone blender, so to speak. And that's processed down to that fine powder that most people receive back as cremated remains.
Okay.
Now there are implants of individuals. Some people want them, others don't. But the implants, I think, are important to note because each one is identified, and sometimes families will want the implants back just so that they can cross-check the numbers to make sure that their loved one was cremated. If you're
When
not,
you're saying implants, are you saying pacemakers? Because
not,
in today's mind, the first thing I'm thinking of is like silicone implant.
okay,
And I don't think that's about.
they melt away.
They melt away.
We don't worry about removing those. No,
Right.
pacemakers have to be removed because they're battery operated, and so they will explode
Prior to cremation.
Okay. So and trust me, if they explode during cremation, nothing makes a cremationist angrier because you're damaging the inside of the machine,
which are very expensive.
They are expensive to even upkeep. So, yeah, the implants that I'm talking about are knees, shoulders, spines.
Oh, of course, yeah.
The titanium implant.
Titanium implants. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So just know those are options. You can keep those if you want them, but you don't always have to keep them, and not everyone does. Actually, I would say 0.5% of 1% would probably
actually want to keep them.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that something that you ask up front? Like, hey, I know this individual has 2 false knees. Do you want them?
No. So what we do is we actually ask the individual at the time of the arrangement, so do they have a pacemaker? And that opens the conversation.
Oh,
so as soon as they say they have a pacemaker, say, we will remove that. Do you want that back? And then if they say no, okay, fine, we'll discard it. Do they have any other implants that we should be aware of? And then they say, well, yeah, she has a shoulder, she has a mesh for an aneurysm that she had, or a knee replaced, hip replaced. Sure. Yeah. And so we then just ask if they want any of that back. Most do not.
Okay. So that's just about start to finish.
Start to finish. That is correct. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of people that want to watch it happen?
No, we probably have maybe 1 in 250 that will want to actually witness the cremation. And if you're going to witness the cremation, I'll just say this, please have them open the box. Otherwise, why in the world are you witnessing the cremation?
Right.
You want to make sure that it's your loved one that's being cremated. And so once the part of it,
what they're worried about.
That's what everyone's concerned now. How do I know I'm getting back my loved one? So my question then is, if you're really concerned, you shouldn't cremate, because once she's cremated, once she's cremated or he's cremated, I can't go back. I can't tell. Right. Yeah, everything's been consumed by fire. So anyway, so there are other options of cremation as well, but like the new green hydrolysis cremation process has just been.
Is that the tree one?
No. Hydrolysis is immersed in liquid, and it's just a gradual dissolve of tissue. It's a warm lime based type of cremation where the body is actually disintegrating in liquid, essentially what it is. But I've always been concerned with it because how do you dry the bone after that? I mean, you still have to put it under fire, right? At least I don't know that much about it. It's fairly new. It's only been around about a year, maybe 2 years. So anyway, and now they have composting, which New York started, and they allow individuals to have their loved ones as compost.
Be compost.
Yeah. So that's a long, elongated process. It's about 70 days, but it can be done. Okay. So do you want to hear should we go to
what time it is?
Oh, what time is it?
It's time to be frank. My favorite time of the day.
Okay. I love it. So, so in answer.
Let's hear a story. Let's hear a weird something.
So just so you know, this podcast is not only to be informational, but I also want it to be a type of format where you can actually hear stories that have actually taken place and what do take place, something you would never hear on the outside unless you were specifically in the room, being a part of it, or what it was that was actually taking place. So hence the title of this one, The Witching Hour. The Witching Hour. And in honor of Halloween, which is one of my favorite holidays.
Is that because of being a mortician, or do you claim Halloween because you are a mortician?
You know, I was just
Does it
asked
belong
this
to
question.
you?
Of course it
This
does.
is your holiday.
That's a silly question. You've lived with me for years. What do you talking about?
What do you mean? Of course you know.
What? Okay, so let's start with a story about something that occurred, which I will never ever forget, and has left such a huge impression on me that I tell this story to my kids all the time, and they like to hear the story over and over and again. But so it was just started out like any other normal day, and I had gone to the crematory, and what I would do is I would do a round of cremations, generally 4, maybe 8, before I started doing my runs, and we did cremations for up to 10 mortuaries in the valley. So I was getting ready to go and retrieve, or at least bring into my care, individuals that they had ready for me to pick up for cremation. One particular mortuary asked that I come a little earlier because the situations and circumstances surrounding the individual that had passed away, they just wanted the individual out of their building.
That's never a good sign.
I just remember thinking to myself, what is she leaking? She wanted to get out of the building just because she stinks, or she's decomposing. So anyway, I get to the mortuary, and the manager meets me, and he says, "Hey, Frank, we need to get this out of here. We have others that we need you to come back and pick up, but this one we want out of here immediately." So I said, "Oh, okay. Is it ready to go? Give me the paperwork." So he gave me the paperwork, and I walked over to the box, and immediately on the box, I noticed that there was a pentagram that had been drawn onto the box. And I looked at the name, and I just thought to myself, what are we doing here? And I thought, is this some sort of a joke? And the manager said, "Did you see the pentagram?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You need to get, she is a full 100% witch. She identifies as a witch. Her family identifies her as a witch." And he said, "There's been some strange happenings in the building. We would just want her out." So I said, "Okay, no problem."
Right.
So I went on ahead and I loaded her into the van. And again, like I said, she rode with me by herself because it was too early for the other mortuaries for me to go to. He said that he wanted her out as soon as possible, and that I would need to be coming back for some additional individuals that would need to be cremated later that day. So as I'm driving back, and it's about a 35 to 40-minute drive from the crematory to this mortuary, and I remember driving, and you don't really think too much about it, but Holly, have you ever had an experience where you thought that someone was staring at you?
Yes.
How did you feel?
You just feel,
How do you know?
I'm sure anyone can relate. It's just a kind of prickle on the back of your neck, I'd say. It's just a weird feeling.
Okay. So I had just entered the freeway, and I could have swore I heard a noise in the back of the van. So I look in my
And it was only her there.
She's the only one there. I look in my rearview mirror, and I look up, kind of looking down to make sure that the box hasn't opened or anything like that. But
it didn't move.
Still exactly the way it was. So I brushed it off. So I kept driving, and not 30, 40 seconds later, all of a sudden I had that piercing. I had a feeling that someone was gazing at me from the backside. And I reached up and I grabbed my rearview mirror and I started moving it back and forth.
Yeah. Is someone back there?
Yeah, exactly. Or could I see something? And still nothing was happening, but that feeling never left me. And I got to the mortuary, or to the crematory, and I remembered before I left to go pick up that woman that I had cleared out one of the mortuary, or one of the retorts, and everything had been swept out and was probably cool by now. And she weighed about 180 pounds. And I just thought to myself, yeah, she's ready to go. I've got the paperwork. She's going right in. I'm not going to mess with this anymore. There's no reason to have that type of a feeling in my facility.
Right.
And they've already told me they were experiencing something at the mortuary, so you just don't want to deal with it.
Right.
So I went on ahead and I put her in the chamber, closed the door, waited about 30 seconds before it got to 800 degrees, kicked on the burners. And I watched it. The burners went from 800, 900, and it kicks up pretty fast. 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300. And so it started to finally slow down at about 1,300 degrees. And I thought, okay, good. She's at least cremating. So I opened the door and I was just making sure
Right.
There's little view doors that you can look in to make sure that the cremation is progressing the way it should. And it did look fine. So I went on ahead and I loaded up the other 3 machines with cremations. And I walked back over to her about 20 minutes later to see how she was progressing. She was now at the temperature of 1666 degrees. And I thought, okay, good. She's cremating good. It should keep going up and probably get it up about 1800 degrees is what I was expecting, and then to have it start drop back down.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on ahead and got the other machine started and got some paperwork done. Walked back over to the machine. It was still at 1666, and I tapped it because it never should the machines always remain at a constant temperature. So I tapped the temperature gauge.
Dial.
Yeah, the temperature gauge, and I kept thinking, well, surely that's wrong. It should be going up. And so I didn't think much about it. Opened the door again. She was still cremating much faster than I expected, but she was still cremating at a good clip. And went back, checked the other machines, came back, and it was still at 1666. So I did something that I never, ever really do. I turned off the machine to make sure that it was still working. Because once the burners shut off, then the temperature will start to decrease. It'll start to decrease, right?
Yeah.
So I turned off the machine, and it was only for like 10, 15 seconds, but it's all I needed to see was that the dial was working. So it went from 1666 and immediately dropped to 1500. So I kicked the machine back on. So I said, okay, good, it's working. So went back, finished one other cremation before this lady finished, went back, and would you believe it? It's still at 1666. And I just thought, oh my gosh. Now, if any of you like to think of the mark of the beast, or you think of something else, what is it you think of? You think of 666.
666.
Yeah. And so that's the only thing I could think of at the time, even though it was at 1666. The degree temperature remained the same throughout the entire process of cremation.
Which and is just for those who don't know, have you ever had anything else like that?
Never, ever, never. It would always fluctuate, and then it would start to decrease once the cremation. It's hottest when you have your full mass of individual that's being cremated, but as that individual is being cremated, that temperature would start to drop because the mass is disappearing.
Right.
And so for her, it was the same all the way down. So the kicker for me was that, number one, she was a professed Wiccan or witch, and she apparently had done some spells on some people in her family, which I came later to understand. But for me, the weirdest story for me when it comes to cremation is probably that one, and that is that it never ever happens to be that way, ever. So 1666, I'll never forget it, and the circumstance that surrounded that temperature. So,
did you end up delivering the cremated remains to the family?
Not to the family. I took them back to the mortuary. I told them I told them they were coming back, and here's the manager's exact words, because this is in the book. He said, "Let us know when you're outside. We have a box designed for her to be placed into, and we'll just keep it outside."
You're kidding.
It was a metal box. And they just had me place the cremated remains in the metal box, and then they closed it and they padlocked the box. That's how weird. Oh my gosh! That's how scared they were. So
something was going down at that mortuary.
Yeah.
To the point where they're saying, we're not even
letting her back into the building.
No. Yeah. Dead, cremated.
Yeah.
I don't care. Her ashes aren't coming back in here.
That's right. So anyway, I don't know exactly everything that happened in the mortuary. He's a good enough friend. I could probably reach out to him and find out, but I just never wanted to pry. So I just feel really bad. And I feel bad because I sped on the freeway. I mean, I was speeding to get back to the crematory because
but is that really
glare.
Is that really uncommon?
Well, yes.
Well, what do you mean? Of course.
What do you mean? Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
So
anyway. Oh, that is spooky.
Yeah, it's a little different. And
Yeah.
hopefully, if this story catches your attention and helps you understand a little bit more about what transpires, stick around. You'll enjoy
Stick
more.
around. There's more to come.
Yep. You'll enjoy these stories.
Let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting childhood, to say the least. To come home, especially when you owned the crematory.
Yeah.
We're sitting at dinner, and the conversation always just naturally flows. So who'd you bring home with you today? I see you have some dust on your shoulder.
There you go. See?
Is that the neighbor? Who's that?
Is that the neighbor? Who's that? So just tell me the names of who you cremated today,
Right.
Dad, because I'm sure someone's with you.
Someone's with us. We have a guest for dinner today. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Very weird. I hope it never happens to you again. I'm sure you've had things much creepier, weirder.
Yeah, we'll talk about
scarier even. Yeah. We'll get to it. So thanks for joining us this week. Catch us again next week for more scary stories with Frank. But for now, this is Coffin Talkin'. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Holly.